Welcome to the EW Podcast. I'm your host, Eric White. In today's episode, I chat with Roxanne Harrison about the Enneagram Personality Test. Roxanne is a certified coach and trainer for the Enneagram, and in this episode, we chat about the 9 different personality types, our experiences going through the typing process, and how Enneagram results can be a useful insight into managing stress and making better decisions, among other topics. If you're interested in typing yourself or learning more about the Enneagram, you can find links to resources that Roxanne recommends in the show notes for this episode. I've also included a link to Roxanne's website, which you can visit to set up an online typing with her directly, as opposed to taking an online quiz. If you're already familiar with the Enneagram and don't need to hear a refresher on what each of the 9 types represent, you can fast forward to the 15-minute mark to bypass the initial breakdown that Roxanne provides for each type. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Roxanne Harrison about the Enneagram Personality Test. Okay, I'm here with Roxanne Harrison. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this discussion about the Enneagram Personality Test. This was something I had never heard of before our mutual friend Rachel introduced me to it, but apparently it's growing in popularity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a real resurgence around the Enneagram in probably the last 5 years. It's really starting to take hold again. Yeah.
Do you want to just start us off with a brief explanation of what it is?
Yeah. So the Enneagram is a system of human personality that really helps explain why people do what they do. So essentially, it's a map of personality, of behavior, of motivation. I like it. It's sometimes referred to as like the GPS of wisdom. And I like that because it's dynamic and energetic. And so I always tell students or people, I'm like, it's a diagnostic tool. It's not a diagnosis. So the system isn't static. It's super dynamic. And so a lot of people are concerned like, oh, you're going to put me in this box. And it's not about putting you in a box. It's really more about realizing that you're in a box already, the ego structure, and that you can break out of that box or you can transcend that box. So, the word's a little funky. People are like, Enneagram, what? It's a hard word to just get your tongue around. So it's really just 2 Greek words that are put together. So Ennea means 9, and then gramos means like symbol or diagram. So it's really just a diagram or a symbol with 9 different points on it. So, and again, if you've seen the symbol now, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the symbol itself sometimes concerns people. They're like, "Oh, that is a very strange symbol." It's just 3 different shapes basically put together, right?
Right.
And they do the shapes do have meaning, but we can talk about that. But basically, it's 9 different archetypes or types, different ways of thinking, feeling, behaving that arise out of this worldview, right? This way that we look at the world, and the motivations that we have are dependent on our type. So, a lot of times, again, I like this visual of a map because it's like this roadmap back to our true selves. It kind of points you in the direction back to who we really are. And, it's so helpful in bringing the unconscious to the conscious, so it's like you can't change what you can't see, right? And so the Enneagram can point us to those motivations, those unconscious mechanisms, and those like adaptive strategies that we've put in place to survive, basically.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as I mentioned to you in our email, it's something that my girlfriend and I have been exploring and kind of using to make some realizations about our relationship and how certain things that we get ourselves into are personality based in many ways. And so it makes it a little easier to navigate that and understand it. But I guess before we go deeper into that, do you want to just briefly outline the 9 different types of the Enneagram?
Yeah. So I'll preface it with a couple things. So the Enneagram kind of asks us this question of like, where does your attention go? So when I start working with students, we talk about the focus of attention, right? Because sometimes you're not even this piece around, wow, different types are focused on different things. And of course, where your attention goes, then dictates kind of how you experience the world and how then like how you're interpreting what's happening in your world, right? So, and I always say like we don't react to the experience, we are reacting to the relationship we have with an experience. So we shift the relationship, and that's kind of what you're talking about with you and Lauren. You can start to shift the relationship you're having with that experience, and you can shift the actual kind of your actual reality. It's really this tool for compassion. Like for me, one of the things that I want people to kind of understand is that it's compassion for ourselves, compassion for other people. This understanding of ourselves and other people. It's just such an incredible tool for that. So, okay, so let's jump in. You asked about the types, so let's just run through the types. So this focus of attention. So when I start teaching, I talk about the kind of a basic fear, and then a basic desire, and then a focus of attention. So each of the types has a name. The name is helpful, but don't get caught up in the name. And you'll hear different names for different types. So for instance, type 1, they'll call the reformer or the idealist. You'll hear perfectionist. I'm not fond of that. I think it's a bit of a loaded term. So the basic fear of a 1 is of being bad or corrupt, right? Basic desire then is to be good, have integrity. So their focus of attention, type 1s, goes to what's wrong. And the emotional habit that they have, and you'll hear different words for emotional habit. So sometimes it's called passion, sometimes it's called vice, sin even, so different books talk about it differently. I use emotional habit. I like the activeness of that it's a verb. Yeah. It's a habit, right? And that word comes from my teacher, Peter O'Hanrahan. So he has been teaching with the narrative tradition for about 40 years. So we're going to use emotional habit. Okay. The emotional habit is anger or resentment for a 1. Okay. And so basically 1's got this message that like, it's not okay to make mistakes, or they unconsciously, they talk about this unconscious childhood message of and that's what the message is of the 1. Okay. Type 2s are called the helper or the giver. Basic fear here is of not being lovable. And so their basic desire is to be loved. And the focus of attention for 2 goes to other people's needs, not their own. And so really the emotional habit here is around pride, this pride in like, I don't have needs, I can take care of everybody else. Mm-hmm. And so somewhere along the line, they internalize this message of like, it's not okay to have my own needs, right? So we want to know they're loved and wanted. And type 3s, they are called the achiever, the performer. Their fear is being like unworthy or failing. Fear of failure is a big one. Basic desires to be valued. And so their focus attention goes on what can I do to appear successful, right? What will make me look successful and admired? The emotional habit here is deceit, but it's really deceit around deceiving themselves. That they shapeshift so much that they completely lose touch with who they are sometimes. So the message is like, it's not okay to fail, or it's not okay to be myself, basically, is what they internalize. And then type 4s, they're called the individualists or the romantic. The basic fear here is being ordinary or mundane. So they really want to be authentic and special and unique. The focus of attention for a type 4 goes to this kind of what's missing, what's missing, or a longing. The emotional habit is envy. And the message a 4 will get is like, it's not okay just to be happy. It's not okay to feel happy. So 4s, again, we want them to know they're loved for who they are. They're seen for who they are. And then type 5s are the observer, the investigator. So basic fear of a type 5 is being incompetent. Type 5s also have this fear around like intrusiveness or lack of, like, they're very aware of the resources that they have, the energy they have. Their desire is to be very capable or knowledgeable. And their focus of attention is really on this intrusiveness, right? Like, who needs my energy or my attention? And the habit is what they call avarice, or like greed, kind of stinginess, that kind of thing. So the message the 5 internalizes when they're a child is around it's not okay to be comfortable, right? To have comfort. And then type 6 are like a loyal skeptic. So the basic fear of a type 6 is the fear of being without support or guidance, basically. The desire is to have safety and security. So their focus of attention, 6s, go to what could possibly go wrong. They're planning for a worst case scenario kind of thing. And the emotional habit here is fear, is fear. And the message that 6s get is unconsciously kind of internalizes that it's not okay to trust yourself, basically. And that's why the self-doubting comes into play. Type 7s, they call the Epicurean, the adventurer. Their fear is kind of like being stuck in pain, right? So their desire is to really just be content or okay. They focus on options. They want their freedom. And so the emotional habit here is what's called gluttony. But it's like a banquet, right? They just, if this much is good, then more is better, kind of thing. And the message they internalized, this is unconscious often, is that it's not okay to depend on someone. And so we want 7s to know that they'll be taken care of, right? So it's like this message that we want to transform. And then 8's my type, called the challenger or the protector, sometimes called the boss. Again, I'm not fond of that. The basic fear here is like being harmed or controlled. And the basic desire is to be able to protect oneself or not be betrayed. And so the focus of attention for an 8 goes to who has the power. The emotional habit here is lust or like excessiveness. And the message unconsciously that's internalized here is it's not okay to be vulnerable. It's not okay. And then our type 9s. So then we've got the peacemakers. So our type 9 sits at the very top of the Enneagram map. The basic fear of a type 9 is being in conflict. And their basic desire is to have peace or kind of this inner stability, this inner comfort. And the focus of attention here is really on often other people's agendas or where the harmony is. Okay, so the emotional habit is an interesting one. It's called sloth, or kind of this self-forgetting. And it's really self-forgetting your own self, your own what's most important to you. And so 9s unconsciously have internalized that it's not okay to assert themselves, right?
Yeah.
Or so we want them to know like their presence matters, right?
Yeah.
So those are, I mean, that's a very down and dirty version of the types.
Yeah.
But just the name itself gives you a little bit of sense of, you know, what might be in store for that particular type.
Yeah. And for anybody who's trying to keep up at home, I will make sure to post links in the show notes for this that details each of the types and allows you to dive a little deeper into that. But for each of these types, this was something you mentioned when we first talked, that for each person, there is one overarching type that they are throughout their entire life that sticks with them. And that doesn't mean that you can't experience qualities from another type, correct? Can you just elaborate on the relation a person has to their type and the others? Yeah,
for sure. So you're absolutely right. Your core type doesn't shift. So if you are a type 4 when you're 10, you're type 4 when you're 20 and 30 and 40 and 50. So from my teachers and other people, you know, typing people under age of 15, you know, is tricky. I know people like to type their young kids, but it does become a little bit tricky. But as far as the numbers themselves, they don't hold any significance. So if you're type 1, it doesn't mean that's the best type. They're all on equal footing.
They all have a yin and yang element to them, is what I noticed. They all have qualities that are very admirable and also things that they can kind of slip into that might be considered unhealthy.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting you use the yin and yang because there are types that are considered more yin, more feminine, you know, and then there are types that have more of a yang or masculine energy. And it's interesting because like myself, type 8 is more of a masculine energy, more of a yang type, right? Whereas a type 2 is more of a yin, more of a feminine type. Now, that becomes tricky because sometimes, you know, as a type 8, women don't want to be type 8s because of that masculinity, that energy that can surround it, and vice versa. So it's interesting that you kind of caught on to that. You know, there are, well, I mean, we can talk about your experience with the typing process. I mean, you know, there's ways to type yourself. And so I think the online tests are fine. They're great. You know, the thing that's important is like only you are going to really, really be able to type yourself. I think that's important. We have a tendency as humans to be like, oh, we want to type everybody. But remember, because the Enneagram is rooted in the motivation as opposed to the behavior. So only you know your motivation truly. And I'll give you an example. I may have used this when we talked the first time, but like, you know, you and I might work together and I follow the rules because rules are meant to be followed, and there's the right way and there's a wrong way, and it's very black and white for me, right? And they give me structure, and that's what I need. You might follow the rules because you value harmony, peace, you want to get along with your boss, you don't want friction. So our motivations are very different, even though the behavior is the same.
Right. Yeah, right? I like that distinction. That is.
Yeah.
And that's whenever I took it with you, I mean, I got completely different results taking it with you versus taking it online. And one of the things that I've kind of been considering, and maybe we can talk about this more, is my own personal experience in life, going through a traumatic period and a period of major growth. It was kind of hard for me when talking to you to look at the bigger picture and to look at the themes that maybe held true, you know, more consistently. I maybe had a tendency with you to look at maybe like a real recency bias or something. And I've been looking at yours as almost a primer for me taking the online one. And I kind of wish I would have done it the other way around, but it is what it is. But when I took it with you, I ended up being a 6, and that was something I definitely resonated with. And then I kind of dove deeper into it after I took it online. And, we had said that the 4 could have also been something, the individualist. But when I took it online, I was tied with 3 and 4, the individualist and the achiever. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting whenever I started to read more about what the achiever was. I started to think of all these times in my life where that was so true. Like I was thinking about being, 11 or 12, having the family over and wanting my cousins to watch me play video games and just wanting to be that center of attention, wanting to be affirmed. And the more I thought about it, the more I kind of identified with that. And I think that's where I've landed is at the achiever.
You're alluding to, we do try and look at your whole life, kind of the backdrop or themes. And often we'll, as a teacher, and I've been trained to say, think of yourself when you're 19 or 20, because that's kind of when you're at your truest sometime. And so I know, when I'm interviewing people, I'll try and have them reflect back, or has this always been the case? Mm-hmm. So maybe in your situation, we may be talking about a recent situation, but I may say something like, well, how is it when you were 10 or 11, or has that always been the case? So we're trying to find themes, but you're also trying to see where you've made changes and shifts, because that's what we do as humans, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, trauma plays a huge, attachment, how well you attached, were you able to attach at all? All of those factors play a huge role in the development of your ego, of yourself, your personality. Yeah. And I think you brought up something else, which I like is, it's all information. It's all data, right? So you took the online test and you came out one way. You and I spoke and we thought, 4 or 6 or 6 and 4. So if you took another online test, I remember I took 3 online tests. They all told me something a little different.
Yeah.
Right. So what I tell students to is look at the top 3 and kind of play with those. Because often those online tests, they might not get the first one, but your type might be in those top 3. But, I try and tell folks, don't get frustrated if you just don't land in your type right away, because there's so many people that have mistyped, but they're still learning, and so it happens frequently. And there are common, what we call lookalike types, and that's very, very common. And we could go through some of those if you want.
Yeah, I think I read that 3 and 4 often get mistaken for each other.
3 and 4, I would say they do. I mean, so here's the thing: every type could be a lookalike. And the other thing you said was, we have a little bit of every type in us, right? So there's this. Again, you're not in this box, and you're staying in this box. So you have resource points. And those are called wings, and those wings are on either side of your core type. So again, if you're identifying as a 3, let's say, 4 and 2 are your wings. Those are resource points. I talk about wings as like neighbors. Sometimes you like a neighbor more than the other. Maybe your one neighbor has a dog that barks and you don't like to go over there very often, or something. So those are resources, and you may lean more into your 4 if you're at a 3, right? Then maybe your 2. And then you also have other points that you can access that are, you'll see them in books called stressors or security points. I tend to just use resource points, and that we're trying to kind of consciously move and access those points. So again, if you're sitting in 3, you have access to 6 and 9, okay, because you're sitting on that triangle. Mm-hmm. So this is why it's not 9 types. It's actually 54 types when you get into the movement and the wings, mm-hmm. and there's also instincts that we can talk about, and all sorts of complexity. And I don't want to overwhelm, but But yeah, I think some of the common lookalikes can be like 1 and 3, 1 and 5, 2 and 9 are common lookalikes, 4 and 8.
And when you say lookalikes, does that mean the motivations look alike between the two, or their response to situations look alike?
Yeah, that's a good question. So their motivation looks very different, but their the behavior. So this is what you don't want to type people, because again, there's these lookalike types. So if we use like 2 and 9 for an example, that's a common one. Both 2 and 9, their energy is kind of they're what we call other referencing. So they really want to connect. They're very connection oriented. 9s, you'll hear them talk about almost wanting to merge with other people, right? I'm not a 9, but I think that sounds like a cool experience. 9 is one of my wings, but I need to access that more.
Sounds like a festival experience.
Exactly. It sounds awesome. I'm like, yeah. I want to merge with other people. That sounds great. Yeah. So, but the energy to me between a 2 and a 9 is really different. So 9s, the energy is more passive, right? They'll sit back. They're more calm. They're more grounded. 2s are like, they have this initiating energy, right? Like, what can I do for you? And might give you a little flattery and, that kind of thing. So to me, their energy feels different, but they are definitely lookalike types. You mentioned 3 and 8, you and I get confused often. Okay. So we are both what we call aggressive types. And aggressive types is there's different stances, and one is in the aggressive stance. And what it means is like, hey, we can make things happen. We kind of go into things with this idea of, we'll do it. We'll make it happen. Right. And there's other types that's not their belief. 3s, though, tend to have a little bit more charm and finesse than an 8. An 8 can be like a bull in a china shop, a little bit more abrupt. This is one of the blind spots of the 8, is they don't realize the impact their energy has. Mm-hmm. And so, but again, those are both aggressive types, so they can be lookalike. So that happens, Yeah.
And, within each level, in each type, there's various levels as well, right? Levels of development. So it's being typed in the Enneagram is there's like a whole nother level to it of where are you in your development within that type, correct? Can you speak a little bit about the different levels and why that's important?
Yeah. I think, again, the advantage of kind of recognizing that you're moving what they call towards integration. Mm-hmm. You'll see that word integration or disintegration. So there are some helpful clues, what we call kind of these wake-up calls that each type has that says, hey, if you think of it as a ladder, 1 to 9, you've got 9 rungs, right? And I'm moving down the ladder. I'm going towards disintegration. You'll hear it called healthy, average, unhealthy.
Yeah, that was something that I noticed as well. And I was wondering, a lot of the unhealthy characteristics, there was a lot of similarity between them. And it almost seemed to me as you move up that spectrum closer to healthy, you maybe exhibit more qualities of your type. You become more of that type. Is that accurate or no?
You exhibit what we kind of call the high qualities of the type. So I'll back up a little bit. So okay. For instance, if I'm a type, let's say I'm a type 1, and this is, I think one of the benefits of the Enneagram is it gives you specific language. We talk about naming it to tame it. So the Enneagram points you in this really specific direction and says, if you're a type 1 and you start running this narrative that says, I got to do it. Nobody else is going to do it right. This kind of no fun till all the work's done, this personal obligation thing. That's a type 1's wake-up call. So it says, I'm moving down the ladder. It's time for me to become more aware, right? And then there's this whole growth process of like becoming aware. And then can I just allow and accept the fact that, okay, I was in that personal obligation space, and now I'm going to choose, right? There's this choice that we're making, and we're creating enough space to do that. And then we're going to keep practicing that behavior over and over again. That's the growth process, right? And so I think that's one of the really cool things about, you don't need to know, I'm at level 4 right now, or I'm at level 1, but it's really this idea that as a, let's just use 3. If you think, if as a 3, you feel like suddenly you're doing things with the consciousness around, this is going to be valuable. I'm going to be perceived as successful. I'm going to be admired for this, as opposed to like, I really want to do this. So stopping to be like, why am I doing this? What's my motivation here? That's what we keep asking when we use this tool. Why am I doing this?
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because that is something that I've had to check in with myself multiple times while doing this podcast, is just reminding myself of why I'm doing it, and sometimes getting too caught up in, wanting to get likes on Instagram or wanting to get viewers. And it's like, no, I just find this kind of stuff interesting, and I need to stay true to that and just keep doing it for that purpose. So that was, and I just want to go back to something else you said about checking in with yourself during those moments and using tools to grow. That's another thing that the Enneagram provides as well, right? Is recommendations for how you can grow and get past those dips in your I don't want to say health, but in your personality, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's first of all, there's so many resources out there. I mean, it's actually overwhelming, but I think just if I were to recommend a couple books or, resources, I think I told you, so I like the David Daniels book, The Essential Enneagram. That's the 9 paragraphs that I sent you. I like that book. David and Helen Palmer started the narrative school, which is the tradition that I've been trained in. The book is really short, so I think it's a really nice introduction to the Enneagram. It's very concise. And then I like the Russ Hudson and Don Riso, the Wisdom of the Enneagram, which is a bigger book, but it's a wealth of information. And, again, each type will have a specific inquiry. So like if I'm a type 7, one of the things type 7s are kind of notorious for is this, I call it like squirrel, right? They're off. Right? The next shiny object has now got their attention, and they're off doing something else. So, they're definitely like this jack of all trades, master of none. So the inquiry around that would be like, what happens right before squirrel? And really start tuning into that. What's going on? Like, what's going on in your thought process? What's going on in your heart, your emotional center? What's somatically, what's going on in your body, right? Is suddenly your stomach clenched and you're like, I'm, because it's this kind of fear of boredom or limits that's starting to clamp down on a 7. So yes, so there's tons of very specific inquiries that you can work with. And like anything, I'm a firm believer in like, take what works and run with it, and then if it doesn't work for you, move on. Like for me, my own personal experience working with my type 8. So type 8s, it's this constant like pushing against reality, right? We wake up and it's like, okay, let's go. Who do I have to fight? Right. And it's just like pushing. And so for me, it was this, I will not be betrayed. I can trust the world. The universe has me, protected. This being receptive, this whole idea of being receptive for a type 8 is so critical. And so there's mantras, there's these inquiries you can specifically work with around your type that are very helpful.
And each one is specific to that type's motivations and fears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
What about in relationships? I know we mentioned this briefly at the top. I mentioned my relationship. It's been an interesting avenue of discovery for us. But what do you ever work with couples or people who are maybe having difficulties and have found that the Enneagram can be helpful in navigating those? Or what role can the Enneagram play in relationships?
Well, huge. I mean, because of course it's intimate relationships or relationships with your colleagues or coworkers or relationships with your kids or, everything's about relationships, right? And communication. And then, so I think the important thing for relationships, and this is like for any tool, not just the Enneagram really, but is you don't want to weaponize it, and so that's one of the things I talk to people is, again, it's not about knowing certain things about people and then weaponizing it. And I think it's most tempting to do that when we're in intimate relationship with people. So we might not do that maybe with a coworker, but boy, we get home and it's like, okay, and so that's just fighting below the belt, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That did seem like a potential downside, I guess, to being engrossed in the Enneagram is the overwillingness to type other people and to generate expectations on their behavior or even, force their hand in certain moments based on what you think they're going to do. Can you just speak about that a little bit? Is that something people should be aware of?
Absolutely. And I think that, we're humans. And so we do these things, right? We manipulate. So and you've got to do the work, right? So having the knowledge and knowing what a basic fear is and a basic desire and what the emotional habit is, that it's great. But until you actually really engage, it's not going to help you much. So, using manipulation as an example, to me, that's my cue. Oh, I'm starting to manipulate. My ego structure is now taking hold. So what's really going on here for me, right? So as an 8, I can just use myself as an example again, so I value strength and I value power and that kind of thing. What I avoid is being vulnerable. And so that manipulation piece is I know how to manipulate in order to avoid, right? But I have to really, this is, you just got to meet yourself where you're at, because if you're not going to be truthful with yourself, then that's okay. But, again, it's just awareness again. So it's like, oh, I'm manipulating. What do I really need here? So for me, being receptive, because I know as a type 8 and as a type 3, you might be a little heart center repressed also.
Yeah, probably.
Type 7s are also falling into that category.
What do you mean heart center repressed? Can you just elaborate on what you mean there?
Yeah, I love, so one of the things I really love about this work is the 3 centers of intelligence and really getting tuned into those, because for one thing, it ties into Qigong, which I love. But for me, when I started doing a lot of this self-work and got into coaching, I realized on my own that I had kind of armored up around my heart. And so I knew intuitively that I had to do work around empathy, compassion, building deeper relationships. Now, again, this is a point of choice. Like, I wasn't like, yay, I get to go learn how to be compassionate. It was difficult. It's still difficult, right? So as somebody in my, so as somebody who's armored up around your heart, I had to go build my toolbox, and like taking the course at Stanford, the compassion course that they offer, is amazing. And that was rough. It was rough for me, but so incredible, such an incredible learning, and gave me some tools to work with. Mm-hmm. So, so if you're more of a withdrawing type, which are our 4s, our 5s, our 9s, they might not be as repressed in the center, but they're what we call doing repressed, right? So they withdraw into their minds. They kind of pull back. So they need to build up this center, this body center, right? So this is why I love Qigong, because these, what we call the 3 treasures in Qigong, right? Our head, our heart, and our body, they all perfectly align with the Enneagram. So, I mean, I can talk about this a little because this is pretty...
Seems like it came up naturally, so let's just do it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's cool. So, and it's important. So the Body Triad, type 8, 9, and 1 are in the Body Triad. Okay. And I'll relate it to Qigong even. So it's more earth energy, like yin energy, real grounding. So from your body center, the things that the body center helps you with is taking right action, right? Being resolute in your action. And then like your gut instinct, knowing instinctually what's right. And so, when we work with it in Qigong, it's like, it's health and vitality. It's where your sexual drive comes from. So it's like really about impact. What am I putting out in the world? Right? So 8, 9, and 1s live in that triad. There's an emotion that's attached to that, and it's anger. So the triad itself will express, those 3 types will express anger in different ways. 8s tend to easily express it. 1s repress it. It's not the right emotion, anger. And 9s don't really see themselves in the world as angry. They don't even really identify with that. So it's a little bit of denial. Okay. Okay. So then the heart center. The heart center is, obviously we build compassion, we build empathy, deeper relationships. Here in Qigong, it's like, this is nature. This is where the yin, the earth energy, and the yang, the universal energy, combine here in your heart.
Got it.
And so, this is really about like what really matters to us, what our values are. And then the head center is this yang, this more universal energy. And this is where we have objective analysis. We can look at data and be unbiased. Our astute insight comes from this area, right? So knowing, and then planning, goal setting, just those kind of things come from the head center. Mm-hmm. So I should back up too, because the head center, the emotion that's attached to it is fear. And then in the heart center, it's more shame or grief.
Mm. Can you highlight which types are in the head and heart center?
Yeah. So in the head is type 5, 6, and 7.
Okay.
And then body's 8, 9, 1. And then heart is 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
So this is, it's cool because as a body type, you will find all 3 of those types kind of resist being influenced by reality in a certain way. They create a buffer almost. I talked about kind of this pushing against reality. So body types kind of buffer against reality and self. They want to keep this boundary a little bit. And so paradoxically, we can be most detached from our bodies. The Enneagram has so many paradoxes, and this is one of them. My teacher, Peter O'Hanrahan, from the narrative, he would say, the triad your type is in is the one you have the most resources, but you also have the least freedom. And what he means by that is because your ego structure really takes hold and then starts to distort. So the triads are important because you'll see these major themes. So for the body, 8, 9, and 1, you'll see kind of self-forgetting. They want autonomy. They want control, want agency. Whereas the heart type, totally different. They're looking for attention and approval, you know. They filter things, 2s, 3s, and 4s, through this filter of like emotional intelligence, right?
Got it. So just to see if I'm understanding. So in my case, as a 3 with the heart center, going back to your statement about having the most resources, but also the most vulnerability in that area. So that would mean that, you know, I would tap into that shame, needing that affirmation, needing to be shown that love, but at the same time having the ability to tap into compassion and tap into the other side of shame, I guess, which is a capacity for loving or something like that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, 3s are interesting because, well, for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons
they're all interesting.
They're all super interesting, yeah. So 3, 6, and 9, because they are what we call the core type in each triad. So 3 is surrounded by 4 and 2, right? So you're the middle of that heart triad. So ironically, what happens with the 3, and you can tell me if this is your experience, because obviously if you're leading with that, 3s, they're very attuned to what's going on emotionally with people, situations. They can take in through that heart center what people need, or what, you know, again, what might appear most successful for you. But often what 3s do is then they also repress those feelings, because 3s are like, I want to get it done. I need to be efficient. Let's go, let's do it. And so they put those feelings aside and kind of repress almost. Can you relate to that?
Yeah, I can relate to that. And I think that is something I have actively tried to become more aware of and not fall into. But I can definitely, I mean, I'm the kind of guy who has my day scheduled out from 6:30 a.m. when I wake up until 9:30 whenever I go to bed. And, you know, sometimes I forget to leave some time for myself to reset. So I think that does apply to me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so for you, you know, just by you saying that, it does clue me into certain things, but it also says to me, oh, but you could be this type, or you could be another type. So for type 3s, you know, well, for instance, one of the basic fears is just this fear of failure. So if you, again, through your lifetime or through this backdrop, what's been the relationship with failure for you?
Yeah, and I think this was a question that kind of had me stuck whenever we talked, actually. Because on one hand, I'm not afraid to try new things, failing at new things. Like I have a very easy time picking up something new and running with it, and not letting the fear stop me necessarily. But then on the other hand, there is this tremendous fear, you know, I'll talk about the podcast just because that's what I'm doing right now, but of not being good enough for it, of not achieving what I want to achieve with it. There's definitely a fear associated with it, but it's not something that stops me from acting, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So again, it could be a 3. It could be a different type. So and that's why as a teacher, I think I gave you a couple types to look at. You know, very rarely would I say like absolutely 100% this is your type, because it's really for you to explore. But those are the questions, is knowing, let's say a basic fear of a 4, for instance, one that we talked about, you know, this fear of being mundane or ordinary. And I think when you and I spoke, what took us away from 4 a little bit, this is, again, my recollection is,
yeah, no problem.
When we talked about what's missing or this longing, I didn't get a sense that you had a lot of that.
No, not necessarily. I think there's something similar that I have to that in terms of comparing myself to others, but it's not an envy. It's more of like I don't stand up to this person. I'm not, I'm not as good as them. It's not like I wish I had their thing. It's more of a I suck. They're awesome kind of feeling.
Well, you're being like, so this whole Enneagram is the path to discernment, right? There's so much to discern here. And so, this I suck is a little bit more like a 3 as opposed to a 4. The envy isn't so much around like, I want what you have, but it's like looking at somebody else and being like, why can't I be like that? Not that I want what they have. I want your job, or I want, your wife or your whatever it is. But,
right.
Your life looks a particular way. Why can't mine be like that?
Yeah, that doesn't, I don't feel that.
Yeah.
It's more so, like I said, it goes to a shame thing of, putting myself down, not necessarily. And it's hard to explain because those two are very close. But in my heart, I know that I identify more with the 3 version of that comparison than I do the 4.
Yeah. And I know we didn't get to the head triad, but I want to, you're touching on something I think may be valuable here, which is, I think you said type 3s, type 4s get mistyped. And there's a particular type of 4 that really gets mistyped. This is where the instinctual energies come into play. So often what we call self-preservation 4, or sometimes referred to as a sunny 4, mistypes as a 3. And that is because there are instinctual energies, animal drives, if you will, that come online even before your personality. And what happens is the passion and your instinctual drive kind of gets mixed. And this is why we have basically 54 types to choose from. Okay, because you have 9 types, you might have a wing that you favor more. So now you've got 18, and then you have 3 instinctual energies that you can choose from, which gives you kind of this variety of 54 types suddenly. And I'm only touching on it because the 3-4, particularly, like I said, this what we call the more of the sunny 4, which means 4s that often, some 4s will let you know they're suffering, right? They'll let other people know. Others, they keep it to themselves. And then the third type of 4 kind of makes other people suffer. So the head center types 5, 6, and 7. So if you're in the head center, you are processing things through this filter of your mental faculties, basically, right? So I'm always doing this. I know you can't see me, but I'm always like, when I talk about the head center, I'm always like this, because it feels very heady up there. But the goal of the head center types is to minimize pain or hazardous situations. And so they do that through planning, through strategizing, through creativity, imagination, all these mental faculties. So, but all types are seeking safety and security in that head center. So again, if you're trying to type yourself, I like to start with the triads because you start to hone in on the themes of those triads. So if I feel like, I think I asked maybe a question of you, like, how do you make decisions, right? Do you make them from your head, your heart, or your body? Now, that gives me a little bit of a clue, because I know as a type 8, I would have answered that question of like, oh yeah, no, just gut. I just go. I know what's right. Right? That's a super type 8 answer. And so it starts to clue me into what triad I'm in, right? So from the head, whether you're a 6 or a 5, again, the 5 might be a little bit more, they'll remove themselves. They really want this deep, deep knowledge. Whereas 6s, they really want to engage and make sure everybody's supported, make sure everybody's heard. They're great team players. So you start to see those differences, even though they're both using their head, they're thinking quite a bit.
Gotcha.
So yeah, the triads are super helpful when you start to do some of the work. And
for all of the types in a specific triad, I'm just trying to think of, if for the, what was it? 2, 3, 4 is in the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're experiencing some sort of shame was the fear, or that shame was the emotion associated with it, would the recommendations for dealing with that shame be specific to the type, or does the same sort of recommendation work for all of them?
Well, I think it's this, I think for every type, that growth process of really becoming present and becoming aware with what's, you're onto yourself. Mm-hmm. What's really going on here, and giving yourself enough space, whether you hear all sorts of things about how much time you need. Is it 10 seconds? Is it 11 seconds? Take 2 deep breaths. You could say, like I tell my students, use the acronym STOP, take a breath, observe, and proceed. It just gives you enough time to kind of ask that question of like, what's really going on here?
Right. So,
so for the heart center, it's going to be different because the motivation is different for each type. But that shame that the heart types will feel, they might be rooted in something similar, which is, I'm not being recognized. I don't feel connected. I'm not attached. I don't feel seen and loved and recognized for who I am, who I truly am. Mm-hmm. And that's painful, for those types. And they'll all express it in a different way, but you'll hear that kind of underlying emotion, if they don't name it. Yeah. But often that's a clue too, because there's certain types of, oh yeah, no fear, boom, I got it. But a 6, they're fear, what fear? They're not in tune with that as much. Hmm. Yeah.
So utilizing the Enneagram is almost like a form of mindfulness. I mean, it is a form of mindfulness to properly use it in your day-to-day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always tell people, like, it's one tool. Mm-hmm. So if you have a mindfulness practice, so I can just kind of use myself as the guinea pig example, but like, I spoke about, I kind of knew that I had armored up around my heart, and I had an accident about 8 years ago where I herniated my C6, my disc in my cervical spine, and I was having radicular pain down my arm every day for like 10 months. So, and I was not pleased. I was pissed about it. I was very pissed. Couldn't cycle. I couldn't play tennis. I love sports and athletics. And so this was very difficult.
There's the anger.
Oh, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was not just angry. And talk about resistance, Eric. It was like, this is in denial, which is the defense mechanism of an 8. It was like, this is not happening. How can this be? I am going to get better. I'm going to be strong. It was classic. And one day on the meditation mat, it was like, I had this moment of kind of awakening of like, what you are resisting everything. Stop resisting, stop resisting this. And this is when I discovered Qigong, which is, for another show maybe, but it was like, as soon as I stopped fighting it and just this acceptance piece or this allowance piece, okay, this is where I'm at, things started to shift for me. And it really opened up a lot of space around, well, what else am I resisting in my life? Mm-hmm. And then it was like the floodgates had opened. And so again, that's why having community, having a supportive spouse or partner or therapist or, friends, whatever is critical, because when the floodgates open, you don't know when it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So you want to have those people around you to help. But so that was kind of my first, like, oh, wow, I am resisting a lot in my life, not just this injury, which now is better. And, mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. I mean, now that you know a little bit more, mm-hmm. what's your sense of how you could use a tool?
That's a good question. I mean, I've alluded to how it could be helpful in my own personal relationship. And I think that having that understanding is super valuable in navigating, especially difficult times. But on a personal level, I think that just having the understanding of specific habits of mind or things that I might be more likely to fall into is, it's kind of like having a map on a road that you're not familiar with. You can see the turns coming a little better. You can understand what you have to do to get where you want to go. And I think that, in doing this podcast, as I mentioned, there being a certain level of shame or fear that comes with it, it's nice to have these recommendations of growth and these things that, I can use to directly counteract the things that typically take me into darker places, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's having that wake up call. Mm-hmm. And then, then there's like this also, there's kind of this red flag of like, oh, now I've gone even, deeper into that space. Mm-hmm. But just knowing those blind spots, you're kind of alluding to like a blind spot, right. So like for a type 3, first of all, often type 3s have a hard time typing themselves because it's hard for type 3 to say, oh, I've kind of been deceiving myself. I've been kind of living out in front of myself almost, mm-hmm. And type, the heart types all have this sense of almost panic when they know they've disconnected from somebody. I don't know if that you can relate.
For sure.
So even though the emotion of that triad is grief, there's an underlying emotion of anxiety, which is like they really know when they've disconnected. And then in different ways, 2s will start to do something for somebody to reconnect. 3s will shape shift, become what they feel is most valuable in that moment, mm-hmm. or what that person needs. And 4s, they really want to be special, unique. So they may be very dramatic, or, they'll do their own version of shape-shifting. Mm-hmm. So, so 3s are often it's hard for a 3 to say, yeah, gosh, that is me. And, that's always a clue when you land in your type. It's kind of like that, ooh, oh gosh, like, oh, there I am. And so again, I always tell people, just be kind to yourself, like just be compassionate. And if you mistype yourself, it's okay, because it just happens a lot, because you just, it's hard. This stuff is hard. Mm-hmm. This is not easy stuff. And so I think it's important that we do the work together, because working on this by yourself can be really isolating and really painful in a way. So even, just like you and Lauren now discovering it together, I think that's really, and I think it encourages deeper learning. because again, to know something is one thing, but to actually live it and experience it's a different thing.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I'd like to include links to places that people can get typed and find out more information. Obviously people can contact you. They can contact you to schedule a typing as I did.
Yeah.
So I'll put that in the show notes. Is there any other resource that you recommend for typing?
Gosh, I think I gave you the two, and then and then they can go to my website, roxanneharrison.com, and sign up for a typing there. And again, you could read the whole wisdom of the Enneagram and, then land in your type, and just, I encourage again, just to play with it a little bit and hold some levity around it too, if you can.
Yeah.
And
so you don't think in your mind a quiz is not necessarily essential for figuring out which type you are?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's a nice, again, I think it's a data point, and like I said, I'll give you myself as an example. It's like when I started working with the Enneagram, I thought I was a type 8, and then I took 3 different tests and they told me something different. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go play in that 7 space a little bit, right? Because I have a very strong 7 wing. But the motivation and what helped me understand for me was, can I relate more to fear or can I relate more to anger? And so I looked at the body triad and I looked at the head triad. So 7's in the head, 8's in the body. And the motivation is different, but 7 and 8s both can be, we can be gluttonous, we can be excessive, and so it was really about, how do I relate to that emotion in that triad? And so I knew that I lived in 8. But I got off course because, the test told me to go look at something different. So I did, and that just happens a lot. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And so you actively teach people how to use the Enneagram, correct? You're an instructor on it?
Yeah. So I teach through the narrative tradition. Right now, well, our friend Rachel, who is our mutual friend, she's in my class. I do a 12-week class right now, like a learning lab, because again, I think it's really important that when you learn the tool, like spend a good 3 months just in your type. Just learn your type first. This is my own recommendation. Other people might say other things, but for me, it's like spend the 3 months in your type and then start to like explore, oh, here's my wing over here. Here's my other wing. Oh, here's another resource point. So for instance, 8s, we have 5, we have 2. How can I access those? What are the high sides of 2? What are the high sides of 5? So, and that's why I chose 12 weeks, was I wanted to get a group of people to work in community and really dig in those first 3 months. So, so I put, if you don't know your type, and most people that came to the class didn't, so I typed them. And, we've had some folks moving around.
Yeah.
No, I'm a 9. No, I'm a 5. Oh, no, I'm a 1, so it's cool. It's really cool. And the narrative tradition, we do what's called paneling. And so it's an oral tradition. And so a panel, all of a particular type will be on a panel. So we might have 4 people and they all identify with leading with a particular type, a 3 or a 4 or whatever it may be. And through facilitated conversation, we hear what it's like to lead with that particular type. And this is specific to the narrative. And I have found the panels to be so valuable. And I'm going to invite you, when you land in your type, I'm going to invite you to be on one of my panels for sure.
Cool. I'd love to.
Because it gives you so much insight. You hear others. First of all, it's like, I'm not alone. Right? And that's always a relief for people. Like, there are other people out there like me. That feels good. And and then to hear other people's experiences, to know that you'll start to see the different flavors, right? Depending on which wing they prefer, they lean on more, their instincts, which we didn't really touch on, but you'll see those different flavors. But it really, this is where the empathy, the compassion starts to build. This nobody rides for free. We all have our stuff. And I love the paneling. I really think it's valuable.
And the other types are seeing the panels, each panel go on. It's not just a panel of fours interacting with fours. It's rather all the types with their panel, correct? And they're all interacting with each other.
Yes. So like tomorrow, I have my class again tomorrow. I'm doing the head triad tomorrow. So I'm going to have 5, 6s, and 7s. And then, but you could have all 7s. Okay. Or you can have all 6s. But yes, it's a learning opportunity. So through facilitated conversation, I might just say, how was it when you discovered your type? And you can kind of think back to that and, this is what initially I thought, and then I moved here, or whatever it may be. So yeah, the paneling is really valuable. And that's part of why I went through the narrative tradition, and the Enneagram Prison Project recommended that for me. So that was the other reason I landed there. What
is the narrative tradition compared to? What are the other forms?
So there's other, like the Enneagram Institute has their own certification.
So there's these are certifications to become a teacher. Got you.
Yeah, and you don't have to go through the whole certification. But like the typing process that you and I did, I went through a training for that.
Okay.
In order to know how to run an interview.
And the point of your 12-week course is to just learn about the Enneagram. It's not to become certified, is it? Or
not at all. So the 12-week that I'm running right now, and I may change it a little bit, but right now it's really about like getting to know your core type. And the Enneagram is like a whole language unto itself. So there's always this point in class where like the students are like maxed out. They're like defense mechanism and passion and emotional habit and fears and desires and, egos. And it gets a little like, whoa. So that was the other reason I wanted to work for 12 weeks with people, was because you got to go away and then you got to go do the work and experiment and work with inquiry. And then come back, and then we have time to reflect and share. And so all of that takes time.
Whenever you say work with inquiry, is that like field testing, like you're going out into the world and applying the knowledge, or what do you mean by the inquiry?
So what I try and do is give specific, maybe a somatic practice. So for instance, I might say to everybody, I touched, I think, a little bit at the beginning on these like unconscious messages that we pick up as children, because again, the experts say that your personality comes online like 6, 7, 8 years old, right? So as a type 8, this message around that I can't trust or I can't be vulnerable. Right? So the message that I want to receive is you will not be betrayed. So I might say to students, hey, I want you to sit down and as part of a contemplative meditation, I want you to work with this mantra. Right? So each type has, it's okay to assert yourself for a 9. Or you are good for a 1. Whatever the message is, that we're trying to work with. And some people come back and are like, that did nothing for me. But like for me personally, working with that was very powerful. So that's what I'm saying is some things will land. Great. Start using them. Keep using them. Some things won't land. Great. Get rid of it. I think I love Bruce Lee, and he has some great quotes. Like one of them is it's something like, basically learn what you can, take what you want, use it, get rid of whatever you don't want, and then have your own direct experience. right? Incorporate your own direct experience. That's called wisdom.
Right.
Yeah.
Get good at the things that you do want, right? It's like, I imagine how, I used to take karate. Everybody has, their thing that they're really good at, and then you kind of just get better at it, and the other things are available to you, but you pick the one that fits you most, right?
Yeah.
And just sharpen that axe.
Yeah, pick your poison, Yeah, he has some great quotes. He does. I just love Bruce Lee. He has there's another one that's like something like the quest for knowledge or the quest for truth is only useful if you're willing to take action, which I love as an 8, right? As a just do it kind of person. You might like that too, but
yeah, I like that.
It's like, great, okay. We have the knowledge, we have the truth now. What are we doing? So it's kind of for me, it's like the practicality of the tool.
Right.